All right, hello. Hope you're well. We're going to start here in just a minute or two, give some folks a chance to log on. We're going to be talking about bees today. We're going to be talking about hobby beekeeping and what you need to get into beekeeping and any other questions that you might have. So post your questions in the comments and we'll get to them as we can. So for anyone who's just joining us, we're going to take about one more minute to let some folks turn on their phones or their computers and get logged on. But in the meantime, if you guys have any questions or comments or anything, please familiarize yourself with the comment section, and we will go from there to start talking about bees tonight. So. All right, so we're getting up almost to 20 people. Great. So I'll go ahead and start off. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Hoefly. Some of you may already know me, but if you don't, I am an urban beekeeper here in New York City. I keep hives all over the city, and a few years ago, my wife and I started Aster apiaries. It was kind of a way to start selling some of the honey that we were producing and to do more with beekeeping. So from one hive so many years ago as a hobby turns into about 40 or 50 each year now that I manage, help maintain in some way. And yeah, Aster Apiaries is an urban bee farm. We're not a whole lot different from other farms that you might see in a more rural setting. The only difference is that our landscape is actually rooftops and backyards and actually some cemeteries. So we have hives wherever we can stick them around the city, of course, as long as they're being good neighbors to all the other folks who live around. I myself have been a beekeeper. I'm in my 6th season now. I just went through Cornell's great master beekeeping program last year and came out of that. For anyone who is looking to step up their skills or has been keeping long enough and you really want to find out how you can do it a little bit better, that's a fabulous program if you are interested. There's lots of other good programs out there, but I'm a big fan of Cornell's program. And tonight what we're going to do, just to make it a little bit more interesting, even though bees are kind of interesting on their own, tonight we're going to have a few things for you guys. The first thing is a special discount we're going to run on our honey. We're going to do 20% off till midnight tonight for anyone who logs on and watches with us now or happens to catch this before midnight tonight. You can use the code JANBEE, all one word, JANBEE. I will drop that in the comments right now. But you can use that for 20% off our honey. We'll put that up. So check that out if you've wanted to try some of our honey. I also will mention it's on any purchase over $20. So you can purchase one of our 1-pound jars of honey, and that'll put you right there for 20% off. So please take advantage of that. The other thing is that we are going to give away a few different jars to some folks. So stick around and we will do that here shortly. So I put out a call. You might have got an email from me earlier in the week telling you about this event and asking for questions. And so I got a couple questions that we'll start the night off with. Some kind of good general questions. So The first one is it possible to keep bees in the city? And the simple answer to that is absolutely yes, it's possible. Um, we do it along with a ton of other beekeepers here in New York City. It's a small community related when you consider other larger communities around the city, but there are quite a few beekeepers here in New York City. I always like to tell people you're never too far away from a hive. It just might be up on top of a building or in someone's backyard, but the honeybees are here, and that goes for a lot of cities. New York is by far one of the more bee-friendly cities that are out there. There's not a whole lot that you have to do to become a beekeeper and to keep bees here. But a lot of urban cities are really jumping on board and getting friendly with the idea of having beekeepers around. So we're real happy about that. Another question that we got was where to get bees. So if you're a new beekeeper and you're just getting into this, where do you go to get bees? There are actually a lot of different options when it comes to this. One of the main ones is to go with one of the larger distributors. I'll mention Man Lake because they're kind of the big one out there. But they sell packages of bees, which are essentially a 3-pound swarm inside of basically a large shoebox. And it comes with also with a queen and her own cage. And you purchase those. They're on pre-order right now. You purchase it, and then typically around our area in April is when the distributors have the packages available. So depending on who you go with, the bees might be coming from down south, maybe from Georgia or South Carolina. The bees might also be coming from as far away as California. This year, we are actually selling packages as well, and our bees are going to be coming from Ohio. So a little bit closer, but still, there's a lot of package bees that are brought to the Northeast. So yeah, check big bee distributors. If you're here in New York City and you don't want to travel too far, we can certainly help you out. And there's other local places to find bees as well. So you can always send a question to us or to if you have a local beekeeping club. There's a wealth of knowledge as to where to find bees. So another question that we got that was kind of related is where to get a hive. And so there is a lot that kind of goes with this question because you have the hive itself, of course, but then you also need the other gear that goes along with it, like the smoker and the jacket and the hive tool and all of those extra things. So again, you can go to these beekeeping suppliers and get those. You can go on Amazon to find a lot of this stuff. Be aware on Amazon that a lot of the places that have these things might just be buying cheap products from China or from another market and selling them here without being a reputable seller. So sometimes, even though something might be just a little bit more expensive through one of the bigger bee companies, it's better because it's either a tried and tested product, or it's just something that has a little bit more of a reputation, and you're only going to be buying it once instead of just buying it for the season and then it breaking and then buying it again. So, but you can certainly find some good deals and some cheaper things through lots of places. Beekeeping has gotten to be so, I hate to say trendy, but it's a lot more mainstream than it used to be. So you can certainly find equipment in a lot of places now. One other question I wanted to mention before we get to the comments, which I see the comments rolling in now, which is great. Someone asked if they needed a license to keep bees, which in a city as dense as New York, you would think you must have to have a license or something like that. And pretty surprisingly, the answer is no, you don't have to have a license. really anybody who wants to put a hive on their roof or in their backyard or on their property somewhere can do it. It doesn't take a whole lot to do. But with that, you should be learning as much as you can to be responsible. You should be making sure to get the right kind of bees. There's some breeds that are more prone to swarming, which is something that we try to not happen here in the city because it causes panic for a lot of people. So there's a lot of reasons that you should get into beekeeping thoughtfully and responsibly, but for the short answer, no, there's not really a license you need. There's a few guidelines that the city has and a letter of notice that you have to send into the city each year. There's no formal registration. There's no registration fee. So like I mentioned earlier, New York City is a very bee-friendly place to beekeepers. Other places like, I know in Florida, for instance, I have family down there. If you want to have a hive, it's $10 per hive to register them with the state. And that goes for a lot of other places too. So we have definitely a really nice relationship with the city and with beekeepers. And the great thing about beekeepers here in the city is that I think for the most part, everybody does a really good job of respecting the guidelines and doing their part to keep their bees as under control as bees can be. So they do a good job. So I'm going to go to the comments now. I see a couple have come in. The first is from Laura. What is the minimum number of hives you should start with? And is it advisable to start with just one? So this is a question that has a different fit for different people. When you're starting out, if you're just getting into it and you're not starting it for any particular goal other than just to have fun with it, a great number of hives to start out with is 2. A lot of people start with 1, and even in my first year, I started with 1, although I had a friend who had a second one that we kind of kept the bees together. But it's best to start with 2, and the simple reason is that you can focus on looking at the differences between the colonies. And when one starts to get weak or get sick or something happens to them, you have a baseline with the other or a benchmark with the other to kind of compare them to, and vice versa. It's also helpful to be able to swap resources. If one does get, a little bit weaker, you can put in a frame of brood or you can move some honey over and you can help out the other. You can equalize them if one is just going too crazy and the other one's kind of just normal. You can move some of the resources over to the normal. Excuse me. You can move some of the resources over to the normal hive and really mitigate a lot of potential trouble that you'll have with the bigger hive as far as possible swarming or just other problems with getting too large. So if you can do 2, I recommend doing 2. If you can only do 1, if some people only have the space for 1, then do that. But get in touch with someone who does keep bees or can kind of help you through the season and tell you when your hive should be building, when your hive should be contracting, so that you can get a sense of what your hive is actually doing. Because a lot of times you can see signs of weakness or you can see signs of problems, and by your second or third inspection after seeing that, it might already be a month and a half or almost 2 months later. And what you could have done 2 months ago, you can't really do at some points in the season just because of it being too late or just being past the time where you can really fix any problems. So go for 2 if you can. Do 1, but get some help if you can only do 1. And the second part of Laura's question, she has a large field across the street that is Roundup Ready soybean field. So is there a minimum distance that she should place her hives away from the field? Unfortunately, the bees are going to fly quite a distance away from the hive. So if you are just across the street from this field, that's there, and they find things to forage, they're going to go for it. So you really have to move your hives a few miles away before that field would be out of play for the bees, the foragers going out. So there's lots of information, and we could talk a whole night on just the effects of different pesticides and things that we use in agriculture, how they affect the bees. But if you, anywhere you put them on your property, unless your property is huge, is going to be within range of that field. So I wouldn't concern yourself too much with that. Bees are going to come in contact with a lot of different pesticides no matter where you live in the United States. That's one reason that the FDA won't recognize organic honey here in the United States. You might see organic honey from like Brazil or Canada, but in the United States, there's not really any places that are so isolated that that the bees wouldn't come in contact with pesticides or herbicides or fungicides. So, so yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of how it is. I hope that answered it for you, Laura. I'm going to move on to Paul's question, and he asks about starting with nukes. So nukes that's short for nucleus hive. This is essentially a seedling of a hive. It's typically about 5 frames with a queen who is laying and with a couple pounds of bees. So it's basically if a package had some time to set up in a small box, that would be a nuke box. And what a lot of times beekeepers will split off bees from a hive into a nuke box and either start a new hive or sell that nuke. Something that we do as well. A nuke will give you kind of a head start relatively to when you are starting your hive. The kind of takeaway though is that most of the time during the beginning of the spring, nukes are available from suppliers or distributors after the packages are. So if you want to start as early as possible, a package of bees is your best bet. It takes you got to feed them when you install them and make sure that they get settled and are building comb for their queen, but you can totally start them from a completely empty colony. That's something that I did my first year, and luckily I have comb that I can pull from other places at this point with the scale of my operation, but it's totally possible to start from 0 with a package. If you don't want to deal with the things that come along with starting from 0, you can get a nuke. It's already got the queen who's laying, it's already got comb, it's already got brood, it's usually already got a frame or 2 of honey, and that will just get the bees going that much faster. And I can tell you, last year we started a nuke. I purchased a nuke from a friend, and we started it. It was the end of March, I believe, and that hive went on to produce a record amount of honey for us. All here in Astoria in Queens, we had a crazy good year with honey. So all the hives on my roof did really well, but that particular one, I think the hive, I gotta go back and look at the scale, but I think we got up to just about 300 pounds. And so probably we would have taken, I don't know, 75 pounds of that from the hive as honey. So that started as a nuke, and it was great. So you can absolutely start with a nuke. I will also mention, because they come with those extra resources and the queen is already laying, they do tend to be a little bit more expensive. So another trade-off with that. So, oh, Paul, I like when we were talking about the how many bees to start with, the old saying, 2 is 1, 1 is 0. That can certainly be true, especially if you're not quite sure what you're doing. So maybe even if you do know what you're doing. So if you can start with 2 hives, that's always the best. We'll move to Lisa here. She asks, if you have 2 hives, how far apart should they be? Two hives can actually be really close together. In commercial beekeeping, they will actually put 4 hives on a single pallet. So if that gives you a sense of how close they are, they're right up against each other. Typically, the entrances for each pair is pointed in an opposite direction. So the bees that are coming and going in one hive are right next to their neighbors coming and going in the other hive. They tend to stick to themselves or stay with their queen, but there's definitely drift that happens. But they can be right up against each other. Now, is that the best if you're a hobby beekeeper and trying to, be able to work your hive? If I can, I like to be able to walk around a hive and get at it from all angles. So for that reason, I like to spread hives at least a few feet apart. A good 3 or 4 foot buffer zone is great to be able to move, to pick up big boxes and turn in between them. That's great. And really, you can put them as far apart as you like. So there's not a huge issue with that. If you keep them spread apart, there's a better chance of all the bees sticking to their own colony and you having less drift. So if you do have one hive that has an explosion of Varroa or some other disease or some other contagion, it's going to obviously spread a little bit faster if they're right up against each other than if they're spread apart. So some things to think about. How much of a difference does that make since they're still in the same bee yard? It's hard to say, but the distance between them, really, you should think about it for your own comfort and your own ability to move around them. So question here, would it be a bad idea if the hive was indoors? From Justin. So this is an interesting question because typically you don't see hives indoors. There's a lot of reasons that it would be nice to have them indoors if it's raining or whatever, but typically they're all outside. I've seen a video recently of someone here in New York City who had I'm not sure if it was a spare bedroom or just a small room that they could close off, and they actually put the hive in front of in the room in front of the window and just left the window open, and then the bees would come and go right there in the room. Having an extra spare bedroom in New York City is a luxury that a lot of us don't have. So if you could put them indoors if you wanted to, if you had the ability to let them come and go as they please. But I think putting a hive outdoors is your best bet, especially when you've got to move things around and things get sticky and honey tracks through. If you step on honey, it's gonna track with you for a while. So there's a lot of reasons why you might not want a hive indoors. So Mohammed is asking, should we open the hive to see if there are bees alive? So right now, the temperatures are very cold. If you have a lot of wind, it's probably not best to open the hive right now. If we have kind of a warmer day, or even if it's in the 40s but there's no wind, you could open the hive briefly, check to see if the bees are there. If you see the cluster, if you see some bees moving, then you can close it back. This is a great time also to check to see if your hive needs extra food. So sometimes at this point in the winter, the hive has burned through a lot of what they stored from last year. So you can add winter patties. People add candy boards. These are just a candy board is just a hard sugar board that you slide in. You make it just with some sugar and water. Some folks have recipes where they add some essential oils or something like that. But some sort of food or feed is what the bees may need now. So it's good on a warmer day with no wind or little wind to open them up, check. You can also lift on the back of the hive to see if the hive feels light. So if you're coming through the winter, you've obviously been through a season, and you have a sense of what the hive might weigh when it's full of honey. So you can lift it, and if it's feeling really light, then it might be a good time to add a candy board or some sort of sugar food source. Justin asked how often should they be checked on? So in general, we're checking on bees maybe an average of every 10 to 14 days. Most folks, I tell them to expect to do it at least twice a month. Some parts of the year you're going to want to do more. Some parts of the year you're going to do less, but twice a month is a good average. The reason that every 2 weeks is a good number is because that's about the amount of time that a hive needs to go through a dramatic change. So in particular, if a hive is going to swarm, that is the time that they need to create the new queen cells before they swarm, or the swarm cells, and develop new queens, and then follow through with that whole process. So every 2 weeks or every 10 days even is good. You can stay on top of swarming, you can stay on top of other problems, whether you have any sort of diseases or pests as well. When it's the summertime or the flow for your particular area, for us it's June is our main nectar flow here in the city. I'm usually checking on hives weekly, and occasionally, depending on how much nectar they're bringing in, it might be more than once a week. But I want to make sure to be adding boxes so that the bees have plenty of room to store honey, and so that I'm not creating a situation where they may swarm or abscond. So during the winter, I'll mention we might be checking them once a month. So in December, January, February, we might go out once a month to just make sure they're alive or see if they need some food. But we're trying to leave them alone and let them do what they need to do for the winter. We don't want to disturb them too much. And if we were a good beekeeper last year, we've left them enough food, and we've given them the best chance with any types of Varroa or other diseases to get through. So we leave it up to them. But we'll go to the next question here from Sue. Her hive absconded and left a ton of honeycomb on the frames. Will honeybees ever accept another hive's honeycomb and make it their own, or do I have to clean all the frames of the honeycomb completely? So let me see the rest of that there. I was hoping to just throw a new package of bees in it and see if they'll just recycle the comb themselves, and they absolutely will. Before you just throw new bees on there, it's good to open up the hive and do a bit of an autopsy to see why the bees died. If it's just from starvation and it wasn't from any particular disease or pathogen or anything, then that comb will be fine. And in fact, during these nights and even days right now when we're having these freezing temperatures, if you can tip the boxes up so that they get some good light during the day, let them stay frozen outside for a few days, you can bag them up and set them aside so that the wax moths don't get to them. That's going to be your number one problem between now and the spring, are wax moths getting into those colonies. And of course, if you live in an area that has a lot of mice population, then that's also something, if your hive is outside, that can be a problem as well. The mice will get in there to try to stay warm, and they really make a mess of things. So you can absolutely do that. If, however, the colony looks, the dead bees look diseased in any way, although you mentioned they absconded, so you're not going to have many bees to look at, but just go through the frames and make sure that everything is looking normal. You don't see any weird textures, anything that looks slimy but it's not supposed to, or weird colors like anything that should be brown but it's like green or gray. You want to note that stuff, and if you can cut out those parts, you don't want to give those to new bees and get them started on whatever problems the last hive had. So, but you can totally reuse comb from year to year. That's what we do. That's what most beekeepers do. We eventually just rotate it out after a few years for the most part. Okay, we're getting to some questions about feeding right now. What's the best protenic? Is that the right pronunciation? Recipes to feed the colony during the winter where there are no natural resources. So as far as recipes go, I'm sure you can find plenty of them online. There's lots of beekeepers who post lots of different things. You can find videos on YouTube as well. Typically what I do is I purchase winter patties. So I'll go to my beekeeping supplier and pick up the winter patties that I need, and then that's one less thing for me to deal with. But you can absolutely go online and find all kinds of recipes. In fact, if you want to find a recipe and send it to me and ask about a specific one, I'm happy to give you my opinion on it. But as far as like giving you a recipe right now, I don't have anything I can just give you right away. But please also mention here, let's see, where can I put it? Well, I'll put my email up here. So if you guys have any questions after this, or at any point, you feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll do my best to answer them as I receive them. So I hope that answered your question. So Howard asks, when I start my hive, should I start with one brood box, or is it okay to add a queen excluder and super on top? Do I wait? The short answer is just start with the brood box. Don't worry about the queen excluder. Don't worry about any supers at this point. The biggest reason is you want the bees to really work the brood box and create a nice space for the queen to lay. You want them to build out as much comb as possible so that she has plenty of room to lay. And then once that box has gotten to be like 60-70% full of bees, and I typically count it bees on both sides of a frame as a frame of bees. So once I get up to about 6 or 7 in a box, then I start thinking about adding a new box. A lot of times for that type of equipment, with deeps, a lot of folks will have 2 deeps and then they will start their supers. That is a good management style, especially if you're not going to be around all the time to be checking on the colony. There is a whole technique where you just use one deep brood box and supers above that. It takes a little bit more time to manage because you really have to stay on top of the bees, especially when the population is exploding as we get into the late spring and into summer. So that's a big thing to think about when you decide how many boxes you want, because if you're not going to be around all the time, I would say you want 2 deeps and then your queen excluder and then supers above that. So and as far as waiting, like I mentioned, for brood boxes, I usually wait until there's a good solid 6 frames, usually 7 frames of bees before I start putting a new box on, and that's just to make sure that they've completely utilized that whole box before they go to the next one. When you get to the honey supers, I'm looking for like 5 to 6 frames that are getting full of nectar, and then I'll start thinking about putting on the next one. So that gives you a little bit of idea. One thing to also think about tonight is the fact that I'm speaking a lot from my own experience, and my own experience is different from other folks who keep bees successfully. So there's a lot of different ways to do this and a lot of different benchmarks and cues and different things that people look for with their bees. So I'll give you everything that I do, but you're sure to find at least a few other beekeepers who do something just a little bit differently. All right, so another question will go here from Matthew. We had our queen leave one hive and enter another hive, a thriving hive at that. We attempted to provide the queenless hive with a mated queen, but they did not accept her. As a result, we had laying workers. Can you use that comb? Yes. Probably at this point that hive has died, I would assume. You can absolutely use the comb. The laying workers will have only laid drones, so they will ultimately the hive will have just died out. So as long as there's nothing that is bad with the comb, as long as it's looks like a normal color, smells like has a normal smell or odor to it, it doesn't look, there's no weird textures on it, then it's something that you can certainly reuse. If you have any doubts with any of this type of stuff, it's always great to ask someone. Get in touch with a local bee club or get involved with a local bee club. Find another beekeeper who can, if they can't mentor you, hopefully they can at least answer some questions here and there. And everybody has a camera on their phone, so take a picture of it. Even if you don't have anybody to send it to right away, you can go on Facebook and find groups and things like that. So sorry to hear about your queen. Was she I guess she was a new queen who was going to mate and she came back and got confused? Feel free to comment or to reply on your comment and let me know if there's anything more to that. But you can absolutely reuse comb in that situation in most cases. Justin asks, if there are multiple hives, will you need multiple queens? You absolutely will. So every hive has a queen. Every hive is a colony. Every colony needs a queen. You can certainly have a situation where you have two queens in a hive, but you have to have at least one in there always. If you don't, then you'll get into a situation like with the last question where the workers will actually start laying eggs instead of having a queen. They will start laying eggs, and because their eggs were never fertilized, they can never produce the female workers. And the workers are really what keep the hive going. So if you don't have that queen, your hive is just going to eventually die out. So however many hives you have, that's how many queens you need. The great thing about packages and nukes and getting bees from other beekeepers or beekeeping companies is that you're typically going to get the queen with the workers at a minimum in a package. So you'll get a separate queen with each package that you get. You'll want to get one package for each hive that you want, and you'll be set. So going back to Sue, she wants to know, what do I use to treat Varroa mites and small hive beetles, and how successful have I been? So this is another one of those answers that I'm going to give that is going to be from my own experience and my own situation here in the city. It's going to vary for a lot of people, but I'll tell you a little bit about mine. The main thing that I use to treat mites is Formic Acid. So it comes, the brand names that you usually see it are Mite Away Quick Strips or Formic Pro. They both come from the same company, but they're a vapor that affects the Varroa in the colony. The vapor can actually penetrate the comb, so we can get to the Varroa that are reproducing inside the comb with the larval bees or the pupas, and then we can. It also kills all of the phoretic Varroa or Varroa that's exposed either on bees or in the hive somewhere. And what it does is it burns their the acid burns their receptors, and they're not able to feed themselves and continue. So they end up just dying. It's a great, effective method. I always have a big drop from with the mites when I apply the Formic Pro, and it's great. Some people do report that they have they have queen loss after using it. I haven't really seen that so much, but you know, as soon as it happens one time, then I will have seen it. But it does happen for other beekeepers, um, and it can be kind of expensive compared to other treatments. I think unless you're buying them in bulk, they're going to be probably around $7 or $8 per hive to treat. So that's something to think about as well. Uh, so that's the main thing. The other thing I use to treat for mites mainly is oxalic acid, and I use that as a vapor. So I have a vaporizer. I put the crystals in, and turns it into a vapor, and that vapor uh, fills the colony and leaves a film of oxalic acid crystals that kill, or at least expose the phoretic mites to them, and typically does do a pretty good job of knocking down the mite populations. Uh, excuse me. The big problem with oxalic acid, or the big limitation, is the fact that it doesn't penetrate the comb, and that anything that is reproducing with the pupa inside that capped cell is going to be safe. So any of the mites that are in the comb underneath the capping are completely safe. We're not going to be able to get to them. So those are the two things. For small hive beetles, one of the perks of having rooftop hives is the fact that we don't see a lot of small hive beetles. Those beetles have to, when they lay their eggs and the larva forms, the larva actually climbs out of the hive and pupates in the ground, and then climbs back up in as adults. And with asphalt roof or a rubber roof, there's nowhere for them to go. So even if we have the beetles that show up because it was an infected package or something, they usually don't last too long. I've seen them some at our in some hives that I take care of at Greenwood Cemetery. A few years ago, we had quite an issue with them. We used oil traps, and we put some Swiffer sheets in to try to catch them all, but they've kind of gone away at this point. We really haven't seen them there or had an issue with them in the last at least 2 years. So that's one thing that we just don't have to worry about too much. I know it's a bigger problem in other parts of the country. So with the Varroa mites, I'll go back to that real quick and just mention it, talking about how successful I've been with it. Some hives I've been very successful, and we've seen either a spike in the count, in the alcohol wash count that we'll do to see how many mites are in a colony, and we'll hit them with some Formic Pro, or even hit them with an oxalic acid vaporization, and really knock them down and get them back into get them back under a threshold that we set. Other colonies, it seems like what you can throw everything at it, and the mites just don't care. So it's kind of it's hard to say that I have anything that always gets the mites or always kills the mites. It's sometimes it's just a gamble on whether it's going to work or not. But oxalic acid is great. The Formic Pro or the Formic Acid is great because you can use it while honey is on. It doesn't affect the honey, and it also penetrates the cappings, which is another reason I like it. You can go further to the chemical side of things, and there's Apivar and all of these other treatments that you can use. That there's some synthetic things. There's a lot of stuff you can use, and then you can go and use. Some folks use different essential oils. There's other things you can do, but for us, we tend to stick with kind of in the space of the Formic Pro and the oxalic acid. Then if those aren't working, then we'll consider other options. So Howard asks, or Howard's daughter asks, is beekeeping suitable for children? She's 12 and hoping to get some honey this year. So yes, beekeeping is great for kids. I think it's awesome to teach kids that to teach them not to be afraid of bees. A big thing I know ever since I was little, I was always taught that any stinging insects are dangerous and you should stay away. I think that's what most of us are taught when we're growing up. But if you can teach kids, not to be afraid, but to just let bees do their thing, or let these little creatures kind of take care of themselves and do their job, it's really incredible. And kids, despite what you may think, kids react to that, and they're very respectful of it. And I know whenever we've had kids out to see the hives, they're just more fascinated by everything than they are wanting to run around or get crazy. So I think it's great for kids, especially if you're going to have your own hives. If you do have kids, be sure to get them a jacket. Be sure to teach them to, keep a respectful distance from the hives, and give them some expectations on what type of behavior is acceptable. For us, if you have a hive up on the roof like we do, or like a lot of people do in the city, if you're taking a kid up on a roof, there's obviously extra precautions that you need to take. But beekeeping is great. It can be a family hobby. And of course, getting honey at the end of the year is such a great reward for all the work that you put in throughout the season. So good luck with that. I hope it works out well for you, and I'd love to see pictures when you guys get your colony. Take some photos and send them my way. So Lisa asks, what's a super? A super is essentially just a honey box, and it can be any size. There's different sizes when it comes to hive boxes. You have usually deeps, mediums, and shallows. And really anything that you're using for the bees to put honey in is considered a super. So when we're adding boxes to our hives, we usually have a couple brood boxes, which they're only called brood boxes because they're the bottom half of the colony or the hive, and that's where the queen is laying. And then we'll usually have a queen excluder, and then the boxes above them, even if they're the same size box, those are our honey supers, and that's where we're going to be pulling honey from. So that's what a super is. If you've heard any other vocabulary that I've used tonight that sounds strange, or you just never heard it before, definitely call it out, and we'll go through it real quick. But there's lots of things that are just a little bit different, or a little bit strange, or kind of older terms that we use that it's regular in beekeeping, but not always in modern conversation. So we're coming up to our last 15 minutes or so. Let's see here. Oh, we've got Nico from Brooklyn. Hey, how's it going? Matthew asked a question, or no, sorry. The queen that you were talking about earlier, you had a queen that came back to a different hive. She remained in her hive until the fall, and then she went into the adjacent hive and removed the existing queen. So that's certainly possible if there's two queens in a colony. A lot of times they will fight, and the fittest will survive. Yeah, it's tough at that time of the season. If it's late in the season, then it's tough to get new queens even. A lot of times, a lot of beekeepers or a lot of beekeeping companies start winding down their queen rearing in the fall, and that's mainly because there's not really drones for the queens to mate with. So if they can't mate the queens, then the queens really can't do their job, and it's not worth selling them. So, but yeah, sorry to hear that she wasn't accepted. We're going to go back to Nico real quick for a few questions here. Number one, do you insulate your hives, and how? Yes, I do insulate my hives, but I don't use foam insulation. A lot of times you'll see hives that are or winter preparations where beekeepers are either encasing the hive in 2-inch thick foam. That's one way to do it. Other beekeepers wrap their hives with roofing paper or roofing felt, which is a good way to wrap your hive. You can also insulate under the outer cover. That's what I do. I typically wrap with the black roofing felt and then have some insulation under the cover, just to, keep the drafts out. The big thing about hives in the winter is that the inside air temperature is going to be the same as the outside. It's really that cluster is what is going to stay warm. So with that thought, the main thing you want to do is keep the drafts out and have a way for the moisture to get away from the cluster. If you can do those two things, there's other things you need to do, like making sure the hive has enough food and has been taken care of over the season so that they don't have any crazy pests or disease that they're dealing with over the winter. But as far as insulating, if you can do what you can to keep the draft out and to give them some ventilation, then you're going to be good. The bees do a really good job of insulating themselves. Question 2, how many hives do I take care of? So it varies depending on the season and depending on what time it is. But this year I can tell you we're going to be taking care of at least 50 hives across the city. And actually we'll be taking care of a few hives just north of the city and a couple hives in New Jersey this year. So we'll be handling about 50. I expect that it might be 50 to 60, but most years I've been doing anywhere from 40 to 50. It just depends. The next question from Nico: how do I prepare for winter, sugar or moisture boards? So, like I mentioned earlier, I wrap my hives with the roofing felt. I also will put a pile of just granulated sugar, usually either on top of newspaper that's on top of the frames of the top box, or in some cases I'll just put it on the inner cover that's on top of the frames on the top box. And then I usually have a spacer and some insulation and the outer cover. I always have at least one hole for that warm moisture to escape through. And for the bottom of the hive, if it's a screened bottom board, I'll put in the insert and I'll close down the reducer to the smallest opening. So it's nothing too crazy. Most of the time that does a pretty good job. For moisture, I don't use any type of moisture boards. The pile of sugar actually does a really great job of collecting a lot of that moisture, and usually in the spring when I'm opening up a colony, whether it's gotten into the sugar or not, that sugar's usually got a nice hard shell on it, and it's easy to just kind of pull it off in big chunks and either whip it up into some sugar syrup or do something with it. But so that's what we use. And then finally, from Nico, is there linden honey in Brooklyn? There's absolutely linden honey in Brooklyn, or most places in the city. I think just because of its distance, Staten Island might be the most different as far as what's typical with the other across the city. But in Brooklyn, in Queens, in Manhattan, you'll find. I actually have a jar of our honey right here. Our honey is a very, very yellow honey, and that's mainly due to the linden. There's other decorative flowers and other native nectars that are in this honey, but it's the linden is a big reason for the color and for the flavor. So all the honey from New York City, especially if it's being all harvested kind of at late summertime, is going to have that lighter kind of, sometimes people describe it as citrusy flavor, with a nice little minty aftertaste, and that's totally linden honey. So yeah, you definitely have it in Brooklyn. And we got Mitchell from Oklahoma. Hey Mitchell, how's it going? Glad to have you on. Paul mentions that he uses all woodenware for brood boxes and supers. Easier to manage and rotate, one size for everything. I agree with you completely, and we actually use all mediums in all of the Aster apiaries hives. So it's a lot less stress having to move frames around. And for anyone who doesn't know, you can get hive boxes in different sizes. You have deep boxes, medium boxes, shallow boxes. They're all different heights. They're all going to be the same dimensions as far as depth and width, but that height is what's different. And because they are all different heights, all their frames are different heights. So if you have frames that you need to move from one box to another, and your boxes are two different sizes, you may run into a problem trying to put big frames into a small box. So if you're using all one size box, which generally, if folks are doing that, they're doing it with medium boxes. But if you use all the same size box, then you're set for moving frames around. You don't have to worry about having the right size frames to put in the right box. It works out really well. And also for us here in the city, bringing boxes up and down a ladder or stairs, it would be almost dangerous to be trying to bring a deep box of honey, which could be on the order of 70 or 90 pounds. It would be dangerous to be trying to lug that thing up and down a ladder or stairs. So we don't do any deep anything when, especially on any rooftops. So everything's mediums. So yeah, good on that, Paul. Again, there's 100 different ways to do everything in beekeeping, and some folks use only deeps, and some folks use 8-frame equipment, and other folks use 10-frame equipment. So there's lots of ways you can do this. No way is necessarily better than another. Different techniques might just suit different situations better or worse. Let's see. Hi, Donald from Kentucky. How are you doing? It's so nice to see people from other places other than right here in New York City or around the city. So thanks for tuning in tonight. We'll go to Emily. Emily says, you mentioned submitting a letter of notice for each hive in the city. Is there a resource agency to find those notices? Any other permitting, registration stuff to be aware of? So here in New York City, you would go to nyc.gov and do a search for beekeeping. And that will give you back the letter of notice form and everything you need. You don't have to submit a letter for each hive, but you do need to list on this form, you do need to list each location you have and how many hives are there. So you need to have like the block number and the lot number, the address, the number of hives, and contact information for yourself. That's the big thing for us. But beyond that, like I said, New York City is very easygoing when it comes to beekeeping, and the beekeeping community here does a really great job of like playing nice with the city. So we don't really have to deal with any kind of crazy laws or bureaucratic issues with that. But here in the city, it's going to be the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene that actually takes care of the beekeeping. If you're not in New York City, just go to your local municipality website and search for beekeeping, and you should see whatever you need. Here in New York, it's not mandatory, at least not right now, but there's also a state registration that I always encourage people to fill out. It lets the state know that you have hives, but the bigger thing is that if hives near you end up having a problem like, in particular, American foul brood, which is a very contagious disease for bees, you'll get notified. And the state apiarist will send out, they'll either come out or they'll send out some other beekeepers to come and check and at least let you know about all this stuff. So, you know, I know a lot of people don't want to be having to tell the government or Big Brother or whatever about everything they're doing, but in this case, especially here in New York, I think it's a smart idea to definitely let the city know, but also to send in the registration to the state. So that's a big thing. But check with your local municipality, and they should let you know everything that you need to do. And most states have a state apiarist as well in the government. So search for them, and they'll be able to guide you through. So I'm going to start wrapping this up a little bit. We'll hit a couple more questions here, but I think that's going to be it. We're right here at 8 o'clock. So Charles asked, how many hives do I keep at each location? And how much of a hassle is it to have lots of onesie and twosie locations? Yes, it can be a big hassle to have sites where I only have 2 hives, because it's a lot of extra time for not a huge payoff when a lot of other beekeepers, can go to a field where they have 50 hives right there. My 50 hives that I take care of are going to be scattered across, probably 15 different sites, something like that. For my own apiary hives, I try to keep it at least a minimum of 4 hives in every location that I have them at. I have 2 locations this year that's not possible, so I just have 2 hives in those 2 locations. But everywhere else, I have at least 4 hives. I work with a local cemetery, and they have lots of acreage, and so we keep up to about 20 hives on their property, which is fantastic, and it's great to be able to just spend a afternoon there working all those hives. But yeah, it's tough having just dealing with a couple hives at each location. I have to be pretty organized and pretty aware of what the bees are doing at all times, so that I'm able to bring the right equipment that I need. That's something that I've struggled with over the last few years, trying to figure out the logistics of getting all this stuff to all these different places. But each year I'm getting a little bit better with it, and the more that I work a particular location, the more familiar I am with it, and the easier it is to kind of know what I need to bring, depending on what time of the season it is. So yeah, it's a nice luxury if you are able to have all your hives in 1 or 2 yards. So good for you guys who can do that. We got so Paul's from Tennessee, Ontario, Canada. Paz, that's great. Thanks for tuning in. Lisa in West Virginia. Wow, a lot more folks from out of town than I was expecting tonight. So yeah, thank you all for sticking with me and all the great questions and doing this with us tonight. This is kind of the first one of, I hope, a lot of Q&A sessions, and yeah, it went really well tonight. So thank you all. What we're going to do, I got to find what I'm going to do here. I'm going to show you guys a few things. The next time we do a Q&A session, we'll have a little bit better process to do this, but I've got a few things that I want to give away tonight for all you that stuck around. So what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to be putting my email in a comment here, And the first thing is, if you have questions that didn't get answered tonight, or if you just have questions that you think of 10 minutes after you log off, send me an email, and I'll do my best to get back to you and answer it as best as I can. But also, I'd like to, if you would like to enter to win any of the things I'm about to show you, send me an email, and I will include your email into a little drawing, and we'll draw names, and I'll contact you if you win. So here are the things that we're going to be giving away. We've got a 1 pound jar of our, man, it's so bright. We got a 1 pound jar of our clover honey. That's some good honey. We've got a double set of our orange blossom honey and our buckwheat honey. Those are two fairly popular ones that we have in our lineup. These are honeys that I don't produce here. I actually work with some other beekeepers to source these, because until we have orange groves in New York City, it's going to be tough to make orange blossom honey. But so the third honey that we have, which has been like a surprise, super popular one this past holiday season, is our cinnamon infused honey. Out of all the honey we sell, this is the only one that I can get in trouble with eating by the spoonful. So it's a whipped honey. It's nice and thick. You can spread it, and man, it's so good with the cinnamon. So we've got that, and then the fourth, no, I shouldn't say that. So the fourth thing, we have 5 things total. I have a 2-pack of our honey and pollen beeswax soap. This is made with our beeswax from our hives here in New York City, pollen from our hives here in New York City, and honey from our hives here in New York City. So I got a 2-pack of that for you. And then finally, I had to include some of our New York City honey. So this is a 12-ounce jar. If you, like I said, if you want to enter, I'm going to put my email in here right now. Shoot me an email, and you'll be entered to win. And again, if you have any other questions or anything else, I always love to talk about bees. I always love to talk about honey. If I have the time to do it, I absolutely will. So get me your questions. Give me a couple days potentially to answer them, and we'll chat soon. So thank you all again for showing up for this first question and answer session. I really enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all at the next one. Take care.